Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar on setting key performance indicators and business planning for tourism businesses. This session has been delivered as part of our COVID-19 Tourism Enterprise Development Programme. We're delighted to be joined today by Feargal McCormack, Managing Director, PKF-FPM, who will be sharing some useful insights with us shortly. This is a challenging time for the sector and individual tourism businesses across Northern Ireland who are trying to do, plan and manage within the continued uncertainty arising from COVID-19. In the current climate, it is difficult to make any predictions. In the medium to longer term, the tourism sector is not likely to return to pre-COVID levels for a number of years, and the majority of demand is likely to be from closer to home markets. With the continued uncertainty as we enter into the low season and with the extent and duration of restrictions unclear, it is an imminent concern for tourism businesses. We are committed to supporting the tourism sector in these challenging times. There's no one solution for the wide range of businesses across the sector, and we would encourage you to look at the range of support available. You can access the existing COVID-19 support materials as well as signing up for webinars and expert advice on tourismni.com and covid19.tourismni.com. Through our Tourism Enterprise Development Programme, we will continue to roll out supports for the industry, including webinars such as these and a range of online supports. Based on advice and a request from the industry, we are at this time prioritising support in the area of business and financial planning. But please continue to let us know what you need and we will make our best endeavours to support. If you can complete the feedback form you will receive following today's session, we can continue to tailor our support programme to industry needs. There will be an opportunity also following Feargal's presentation for a live questions and answers session, which we hope you find useful. And we will also run through how you can get in touch with Tourism NI and our advisors if you have further questions. It is my pleasure now to hand over to Feargal McCormack for the main presentation. I hope you all find the session useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. And my name is Feargal McCormack, and I'll give you a little bit of background on myself shortly. But today's webinar, Setting Key Performance Indicators and Business Planning, is part of the Northern Ireland Tourism Business Webinar Series. And in terms of the context, it's also part of the Tourism NI's Tourism Enterprise Development Programme. At the outset, may I say that the slides will be an aide-memoire, hopefully for you after the webinar, and that I may not comment on every single slide. The webinar is designed to help businesses operating in the Northern Ireland tourism industry survive and recover from the unprecedented economic uncertainty caused by COVID-19. And obviously, none of us could be forgetting the potential implications of Brexit. We'll endeavour to offer a comprehensive overview of how business planning and key performance indicators complement each other to create winning business success teams. And in doing that, I'll utilise my own business to share some experiences with you as we go along. Business planning, which involves setting the vision and direction of the business, incorporating KPIs, is all about setting performance targets to facilitate the monitoring of performance and recognising problems that can be pivotal to the success of the business going forward. And I think virtually there's no business now not operating utilising some form of KPIs. And at the outset, may I say that it's acknowledged that one-to-one mentoring may be available to enhance knowledge and understanding of some of the specific elements, and indeed perhaps to help you design KPIs for your own business. And we'll talk about that again at the end. Just a little bit of background on myself. I'm married to Anne and we have 2 children. Not children really anymore, but Rory is age 20 and he's a 3rd year BCom at UCD, and Seamus, who celebrated his birthday last Tuesday, is 26 and has severe autism, and we're fortunate that he's able to be at home with us here, albeit in very restricted, confined circumstances. I myself am a qualified chartered accountant. I trained initially with KPMG, then a manager, and then went on to work for the Industrial Development Board, which is the predecessor of InvestNI. And then I established my own business, PKF-FPM Business Advisors, in 1991. And for the last 29 years, I've been fortunate, with the help of a very energetic team, to grow that business to what it is today, 5 offices and 120 plus staff. And during that time, I've been fortunate to come across a number of businesses, both in the tourism sector and outside it. And certainly in the context of planning and KPIs, I hope to call upon that experience during today's webinar presentation. In terms of tourism, it's a sector I've always been close to over the years. Indeed, in the past, I chaired the Northern Ireland Tourism Training Trust. So let's get on with the real part of what we're trying to achieve today. And we're hoping that by the end of the webinar that you will have an understanding of the link between key performance indicators and business planning, the whole area of business planning itself, key performance indicators and their relevance to informed decisions and improving, obviously, business profitability, value and sustainability. We'd certainly touch on some generic financial KPIs, and we'll also try and highlight key performance indicators specific to the tourism sector. We'll try and highlight the importance of benchmarking and how today it plays a very important role in the planning of business, and more importantly, in driving business to superior performance levels. And also, I hope by the end, there'll be an appreciation of the importance of relevant key performance indicators for measuring and monitoring performance. Obviously, the evolving corona pandemic means that we are currently living and working in unprecedented and extraordinary times. COVID-19 will end, but the reality from a business perspective is that we must plan for living with and post-COVID-19. As highlighted in earlier webinars, an economic crisis, albeit we'd rather we didn't have one, is a good time to take a holistic look at our businesses, to reflect clearer, respond smarter, and rebound faster in the context of, I suppose you could say, applying tomorrow's logic to today's turbulence. And there's no doubt that things will be different living in post-COVID-19. Some behaviours and attitudes will have changed, and perhaps, if we're being honest, some of these will create a better and more efficient business environment. Certainly in our own case, I can say that obviously there's been a lot of problems with COVID-19, but we have also learned some things that probably have brought on faster in terms of our involvement than it would have otherwise happened. I think we do need to reflect on what we did before and what we could do better, and indeed what we didn't do before that we should go for now in terms of products and services, in terms of pricing, in terms of staff mix, processes and policies, etc. But I would suggest to you that across all of this, if a business does not have ethics, governance and trust embedded in its cultures going forward, with strong financial planning, in my view, that business is destined to failure. Now, what do we mean? Part of the ethics means that if you think about a few years ago, the key to business was, can I do it? Yes, I can. I think we're now moving into a new environment where the question now and again has to be asked is, should I do it rather than can I do it? And our brand is so important. It takes us years to build up our brand, but it can just collapse overnight. So quite often, unfortunately, that should I question is a key question for leadership, but you probably don't know whether you've taken the right decision or not for a couple of years later, and maybe it might be too late. I think it's only natural that there's a fair bit of anxiousness and anxiety in the business environment today in the light of COVID-19. However, I'd suggest to you that there are potentially 3 possible meanings of the word fear and applying it to business. The first one is false expectations appearing real. And I think we can all identify with those occasions when perhaps we panicked and didn't need to panic. The second one is to turn a blind eye and say, forget everything and run. Or the third one, perhaps, is to face everything and rise. and the choice is ours. But I think there is a choice, and we need to decide which one of those categories we're going to buy into. In terms of managing the inherent risks and fear that COVID-19 presents, thankfully, in our experience, most businesses in the Northern Ireland tourism sector have now moved past the shock of the pandemic to active leadership and control measures. And the most important control I'd suggest is how we behave. Now, it is outside our control that the Northern Ireland Executive have currently placed restrictions on the tourism sector, and obviously we also have the public health guidelines, and they are creating significant challenges. Many of our businesses currently aren't trading. However, now more than ever, we need emphatic and compassionate leadership, which engages, listens, connects with others, and displays flexibility, understanding, and sensitivity to get people through the crisis and lead them through the current uncertainty to a new reality. Indeed, right now I would suggest that it's imperative that leaders focus on business planning, incorporating key performance indicators, and being objective, transparent, effective, and authentic. And may I suggest to you and bring to your attention, perhaps reflect on the Harvard Business School's recent review, which reported that crises are more often overmanaged and underled. Overmanaged and underled. And that's a challenge for us all. How do we avoid that? As I highlighted in the previous webinar, business thrives when both effectiveness and efficiency are aligned and complement each other. And this is very important in terms of planning to have an understanding of that. And by effectiveness, we mean doing the right things. That is strategic, working on the business, designing and utilizing effective KPIs to reflect, and what this does, this reflects actually working on the business as opposed to in the business, pausing, standing back. And then by efficiency, we mean doing things right. That's operational and tactics, working in the business. So business planning, if we think about it, it involves agreeing the vision and the future direction for the organization and preparing a business plan to set out what your business is about and its targets, who controls it, its key markets, and how it differentiates itself from its competitors. We keep coming back to that, that's the why, and how its core operating plans will be implemented to achieve its planned objectives and targets. On the other hand, key performance indicators complement business planning. They help you to define and measure progress towards business goals. KPIs are the quantifiable measurements of the improvements in performing an activity that is critical to the success of your business. And through benchmarking, KPIs enable you to compare your business performance against your budget or business plan, or indeed through benchmarking against others in your sector. In this regard, I think there's excellent information available from Tourism Northern Ireland and also the annual ASM Northern Ireland Hotel Industry Review and Prospects Report. And certainly from a KPI point of view in terms of benchmarking, that report is very useful. And KPIs should complement your overall business targets, and they should relate to the business's core activities. If you think about it, they will differ for individual businesses operating across the Northern Ireland tourism sector, depending on the nature and indeed the size of the business. However, it is important to appreciate that for KPIs to be effective, there is a requirement to implement sound business planning in the first instance. And therefore, it only makes common sense and rationale that before addressing key performance indicators in detail, that we'll first provide an overview of the business planning process. Now, there's one sure thing: the future belongs to those who plan for it. If you think about it, if you don't have a destination, you'll never get there. If you and I didn't decide to go to the petrol station today to get petrol, or if we didn't decide to go and get milk today, we wouldn't get it. So you have to have a destination if you want to get there. It's the exact same in business. if you don't have a destination, and more importantly, if your team, your collective team, doesn't know where you're trying to get to, you'll never get there. And to put it simply, we can look at that in many different ways. But as one who regularly goes out to visit businesses, unfortunately, sometimes businesses that are in trouble, I can assure you one thing always comes to the fore very quick. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Now, we accountants certainly are very guilty, perhaps spending too much time and emphasis on analysing the past. But to plan for the future, we must design it. And design means putting, if you think about it, what does design mean? It means putting things together, whether that be people, materials, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be equipment, whatever, to deliver a value-added solution to meet or indeed exceed clients' and customers' expectations, and thus deliver market differentiation and premium value. At this point, I think it might be a good idea to ask you to pause for a second and to ask yourself a question. And the question is, why are you working in your business? Please just don't go through the motions. Pause and stop. And ask yourself, if somebody doorstepped you tonight with a mic in front of you and asked, why are you working in your business? Would you know the answer? Or to put that another way, what is the purpose of your business? Now, we do need clarity, because it's key that you have clarity, read this key point. Because for some, unfortunately, they just keep going through the motions. And if you don't know exactly why you're doing something, then it's a lot more harder to decide what the destination is. For example, from a PKF-FPM perspective, earning money and generating profits has never been the sole priority. Our passion and purpose is to care and to help others achieve their life's dreams, and through this earn the trust of clients and prospective clients to help them deliver results and positive change in terms of impact and solutions. Now, you may find that amazing, maybe coming from an accountant, but can I honestly tell you, we've never been out of business or out of work. So what we find is, by caring for people and putting that ahead of everything else, that creates business opportunities. But we don't sell, we help. And that's a culture within the organization. It may not be the right culture, it just happens to be our culture. And that's what differentiates one business from another. And no one would ever be so arrogant or complacent to necessarily suggest one is right and the other is wrong. But you definitely need to know what is the purpose of your business. And we'll come back to that shortly in terms of how that evolves. And certainly within our organization, we endeavour to work together with a common and a united goal to ensure we have fun in making PKF the best firm that we can, that it can be, and from our point of view. Now, most of the people joining the webinar today are actually business owners or senior managers. And again, I thought I'd share with you in terms of the planning process, because leadership is so fundamental in the planning process and how you engage your other members of staff and your team. Now, again, there's no two ways correct or the same, but I'll share with you, what I see my role as managing director of PKF-FPM as. And it's very simple. It's to lead, mobilize, and energize our most vital resources, our people. And to foster trust and a business development culture that inspires confidence and seeks out opportunities and indeed supports greatness among team members. To ensure, if you think about it, that everyone is rowing in the same direction for the greater good. Certainly, we wish to encourage and ensure there is diversity and inclusion embedded throughout the business culture. And in terms of business culture, that's an important point. We'll come back to later on. Your business culture, and every business has its own culture, but that's the glue that joins all the elements of the business together. And certainly in my case, I hope and try to give strategic direction to implement an agreed agile strategy and a collective plan to reassure inspire and motivate our team to deliver positive results and sustainable growth. Now, I can assure you that KPIs form an integral part of trying to deliver that. And to encourage Team PKF-FPM to be resilient, to listen well, to embrace lateral thinking, to deliver change and invest heavily in cutting-edge technology and digitalization, and to promote health and well-being along with fun in a welcoming team and office environment. Now, I don't want to bore you with PKF-FPM. The reason why I'm highlighting that is that I think it is important as part of the planning process that you pause and reflect on your role in your business and what you would like it to be going forward. And the one sure thing is, and this is really important, to appreciate that our present circumstances don't determine where we go. They merely determine where we start. You know, if you think about it, Barack and Michelle Obama started off in very humble surroundings, but they finished up in the White House, one of the most powerful economic families and decision makers in the world when he was US president. And what do we mean by planning? It's very simple. Business planning, in very simple terms, involves establishing, first of all, and it's very important, you can't jump into planning where you want to be or the future if you don't know where you are now. So you need to first of all establish, may I suggest, the baseline. Where are you now? And without doubt, key performance indicators can help you do that. Then you've got to decide, where do you want to be? And then once you decide where you want to be, then you determine how you're going to get there. Now, in very simple terms, in terms of the business planning process and strategy, starts with the current position. There's a number of business tools you can use to help you establish the baseline position. A very popular one initially is SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And again, I'm being honest, it's amazing how many people misunderstand SWOT analysis. And you see things in strengths and weaknesses that people have no control over, and you see them listing things in opportunities and threats that they do have control over. So it's important to appreciate strengths and weaknesses are internal to your business. They are things that you, the business, has control over. Opportunities and threats are matters outside your control. And to put it a different way, the key there is you control how you respond to those matters, but you don't have a control of the issue itself. You don't control COVID, but you can control how you respond to COVID. And to help you do opportunities and threats, you can use another tool called PESTLE. And what that basically is, that divides opportunities and threats up into 6 categories. Political, for example, Brexit. Economic, again, could be government decisions, etc. It could be obviously the impact of the COVID pandemic at present. Social, could be employment or pensions legislation, how it affects your business. Technological, obviously technology is driving a lot of what we all do now. It could be environmental, becoming a more important factor in business, or it could be legal. And again, it doesn't do any harm to list those down and decide are they opportunities or threats, or they could be both for your business. But once you do that baseline of where you are now, then you generate some ideas from that, and ultimately then you agree with your team, your senior team anyway, the vision and the strategic direction for your business going forward. At that stage, then you develop the plan, and it's really important. There's no good having a document that sits on the shelf, and I'll share with you shortly where our business plan actually eventually comes down to 1 page. But you also must link into your business plan milestones, what you hope to achieve within reasonable time periods, and then how you're going to measure it. And then ultimately you evaluate everything and you take corrective action, or you maybe change because it has to be agile. Now, in a previous webinar, I highlighted that the success of a business is dependent on its business model. And good business models are actually based on a valuable formula. And you can talk about the what, the who, the how, and the why. What you do, who does it, how it's done. And as we'll say regularly throughout this presentation, the most important thing is the why, because the why is the purpose. The why is why somebody buys your service or your product. And if you think about it, when customers won't purchase your tourism product or service because they understand what you do. You can tell them all the brochures and all the media, all the adverts of the day and how you go about your business. But rather, if you think about it, they'll buy your product or services on the basis of what they perceive to be the results or benefits which they're going to achieve as a result of buying or purchasing your service or product. And if you think about it, it's when their why and your why are the same, you have a sale. And that's really important when you're doing business planning and KPIs, because you have to understand how important the why is to success in business. Now, I explained in the past, I'm going to come back to it again because it's fundamental to business planning. Actually, it's fundamental to business that there is direction, as we said, it's back to this destination, and it needs structures and it needs processes. And by the way, I'm going to assure you now, it doesn't really matter whether you're a one-person operation or a 1,000-person operation. This same concept applies, in my view, to running a business. We call it the PKF-FPM rocket. And in very simple terms, you determine the vision, and the vision obviously comes from the strategic plan. And once you have the vision, then the business plan comes along, it accepts that vision and revisits it and the best way to achieve it. And again, how does it do that? Well, it very quickly looks at the strategy, the structure, and as I said before, the culture. Personally, in my view, the culture is key to every business. And it's different from one to the next, but it's the DNA, it's the key of a business. And then basically you look at your 5 operational plans. And again, look at your business. You may say, are these relevant to me? I can't think of any business that doesn't have these 5 operational plans. You may give them different names, but obviously you have to have your product or your service. You have to have your marketing strategies to secure sales or revenue. People, well, it's the key to every business. Thankfully, businesses can't be done without people. We need people. Systems and processes, and finally, finance, physical and resources. And you put your plans into that. And linking all those again is innovation. Innovate or evaporate. We'll come back to that again later on. But innovation must be interwoven throughout your organization. And really, it's also important to appreciate that your business doesn't operate in isolation. And you need to have that peripheral vision to observe what's happening around you. Because if we ignore what's happening around us, we do so at the peril. We have to always be keeping an eye out for trends, behaviors, and factors that's going to influence our business, our revenues, and our costs going forward. So again, I'm going to share with you very briefly how we do our planning approach, because I think it gives effect to explaining some of the concepts. To be honest with you, we adopt a system called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or the EOS system. I happen to go to a business conference. I always think it's good to get ideas from how other people do business. So I went to a conference in Montreal about 8 years ago, and the guest speaker happened to be a guy called Gino Wickman, who actually wrote a book called Traction, Getting a Grip of Your Business, and it had a big impact on me, his presentation. And indeed, we've come back and have generally adopted that concept. It's a very good concept. And ultimately what it means is, and I'm going to show you shortly, we actually have our business plan for the year summarized on one page. And every one of our 120 staff have that business plan with them at all times. Everybody's given a copy of the business plan. It gets focus, it gets purpose, it gets single common commitment to achieving what we want to achieve. Now, we also adopt a thing which is part of this EOS system. We've adopted a thing called the 90-day clock. We found in the past that whenever we did annual targets, yes, and we still do annual targets, they're important, but quite often they didn't drive actions immediately. So we actually run our business now what's called the 90-day clock, in that we set targets for each quarter. For example, we're now currently in quarter 3 of our business, and we will have assessed our quarter 2 rocks, which are your rocks, are your quarterly targets, and they're obviously subservient to your annual goals. But so we run our business now totally on what's called the 90-day clock on rocks, and every division or every team has their own rocks, which must be then consistent with the overall goals and rocks of the organization. Now, again, to summarize it, I don't want to bore you, but just how simple this is. Some people think business plans are big, thick documents. In our experience, it's a lot harder to get them down onto one page. Now, believe it or not, this is our business plan. I obviously have taken out a lot of the boring stuff, but it's on one page, and you can check with any of my colleagues at work. This is our plan. They'll tell you this is our business plan. And on that page, it focuses you. You obviously have your value proposition. That's back to the why. What's the purpose of the business? Then you have your core values, which, to be honest with you, they're a vital set of timeless and guiding principles for the business. And they define your culture and your DNA. And they determine, to be honest with you, the way you do business and the way you select people and train people and develop people. And then you have we have about 5 core values. You then have your core focus, and believe it or not, we have 3 core focuses. And core focus, they are the why. That's what we believe, and that it doesn't matter what anybody else believes. We believe it, and it's very important that every business has their own why. That's what we believe is important to differentiate our practice against competitors in the marketplace. And so it's important to think out why you think people are what is the why you would like to develop that people will come and buy your service or product. Then obviously you have your marketing strategy and your target markets. We also put in a thing called 3 uniques. What do we think is unique to whatever? And then we also put a thing called guarantees. Again, it's trying to get across a wee bit of differentiation. We have a 1-year plan. And believe it or not, we then have what does it look like in 2, 3, and 5 years. This is all on the one page. Then on the right-hand side, you can see there we go, the KPIs, the measurables, the annual KPIs. And then we would have some also there financial, then we have all non-financial and project specific. And more importantly, we put in this sheet of paper what we think it'll look like. And that's really important because it's again, where your destination, where do you want your destination to be? Where do you desire it to be? Now, certainly we have never got anywhere where we want to be perfectly, and I can tell you we make tons of mistakes every day of the week. But if you don't have a destination, you'll never get there. So we put it down there where we want to be. And obviously we also brought in a thing, maybe stupid, but we think at the bottom that every year we go for at least one what we call strategic strike, where basically we do something that creates a new revenue stream and quite important in terms of innovation to the business. So I would also suggest that one of the most important things that any of us should have as an integral part of our planning for our business, for your business, is a humility culture. And why is that? That's because if you think about it, humility allows us to ask the simple question, how can we do things better? And humility begins at the level of interpersonal communications, enabling an interrogative, highly facilitated learning environment in which no one has all the answers. Each individual is invited to contribute solutions to the challenges being posed. And we believe that's really a key component of building sustainable competitive advantage through cultural cohesion. If you think about it, an interwoven culture or DNA of humility, that leads to innovation. It increases self-knowledge and greater character. Thus, I would suggest to you that one of the things we try to encourage at all times with any business we come in contact is the concept of OFIs, getting that interwoven into the culture of the organization, that you ask members of the staff to always come up with OFIs, opportunities for improvement. And linked into that is key performance indicators, because they quite often drive some of the OFIs. How do we improve? And certainly in my own case, my life has been a journey of learning and leadership experiences. Now, we all accept we're all human, and none of us certainly are perfect. And our commitment and perseverance will not be perfect either. We're going to have setbacks, we have to acknowledge that, and we're going to stumble in pursuit of any goal or target we set. So that applies to a KPI. But the important thing is not that we have these setbacks, but how we react to them. If you think of Giuliani, very few people really knew much about Giuliani until 9/11. He then became famous throughout the world for the way he handled the 9/11 in New York. Why? because it was how we responded to it. And it's how we respond quite often to situations determine the long-term outputs of our organization. So perseverance and resilience, it doesn't mean perfection. It's not often constant, unwavering adherence to a commitment. Instead, I would suggest to you, it's usually a series of quick course corrections when you get off track. And this is where, again, KPIs, we're going to come to them shortly, have a key role to play there, because they can maybe give you a hint. They maybe come up with something that says, oh, well, that isn't what we expected. And we start asking ourselves questions. So I would suggest to you that running a business is a bit like navigating a ship. It may go slightly off course, but with small corrective actions, we can redirect the business back onto its desired direction and forward journey. And without doubt, KPIs have an integral part to play in that process. I think it is important to encourage people to endeavour to be different and unique and to think outside the box. Because certainly in our own case, that entrepreneurial spirit is consistent with the firm's clients, many of whom, like yourselves, own their own businesses with unique products and services. But I think it's also important to recognise and to acknowledge that intelligent failure must be allowed in a mature society. Many people are afraid to fail, but we definitely, I suggest this to you, should discourage this culture. Because if you think about it, the person who never failed has never got anywhere. And it blocks innovation. And innovation is so key to the success of all our businesses. It's true, certainly in our case, we don't like to lose, but we're not afraid to lose. And there is a difference. We don't like it, but hopefully we have won more than we lost. But I can assure you one thing, we have definitely learned far more from our mistakes than from our successes. And subtly, and a lot of what I've been trying to say here is, in terms of the planning process and KPIs, is to appreciate something that I have to admit, it has taken me a long time to understand. And that is that every service or product that you and I provide, it must be benefit driven. And tragically, too often, we're mad keen to tell people about the features of our product or the features of our service. And we don't focus on the benefits, the results, the impact it will have on our customer. Now, to be fair, I believe there's only 3 benefits. If you can find any more, let me know. It's hard to believe this, considering all the times the pitches we make. And yet I believe every pitch has to be focused somewhere on benefits. And in terms of the 3 benefits, I think in terms of generic, one is about it saves us time. It makes us money or saves us money. And it gives us peace of mind, obviously, and also enjoyment is tied into that. Now, if you think about it, if you think of ladies and lipstick, I don't think I've ever seen a lipstick advertisement telling me what was approved in terms of iOS or EN this or product qualifications. No. The entire advertising is associated with peace and happiness and what we say, an experience of joy. And that's how it's benefit driven. So I think there's a lot of parallels between business and sport. And if you think about it, winning teams do the ordinary things with extraordinary consistency, commitment, passion, and focus. And change is difficult to implement, as we all by our nature are often resistant to change and will impede new ways of doing things. As I said earlier, we have to get that culture in that we must innovate or we'll evaporate. And to succeed, the underlying culture of your business and my business must be to be responsive to change. And God knows at present we've had to do that. Culture is the glue that joins everything together, as I've said a few times already. and is central to behavior and is a key determinant in the performance of an organization and, more importantly, its ability to achieve its objectives. I think it's a well-known saying, you can't do today's jobs with yesterday's mindset or methods. Remember, it was Charles Darwin, I think, who said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. So business, like life, is just a game of inches. In either game, life or business, the margin for error is so small. And thus a united team with a common vision and purpose is required to deliver sustainable, superior performance. If you think about that, it's the power of one. Think of the word team, T-E-A-M, working together, everybody achieves more. So certainly in our own organization, through KPIs, key performance indicators, we seek that inch of improvement, both as individuals and as a collective team, in order to deliver marginal gains. Because again, if you think about it, in order to deliver marginal gains recognizes that 100 things done 1% better will deliver cumulative, sustainable competitive advantage. A very important point. Certainly very important in the context of KPIs. So, what are key performance indicators? Having set the context of planning, we're now going to move on and look at what actually key performance indicators are and how they are so central to facilitating the planning process. But I want to stress again that if you don't understand the planning process and give it the attention it deserves, then, to be honest with you, your key performance indicators will have limited effect. So planning first and then your key performance indicators. Because the better you understand your business, the easier it'll be to increase profits, create better cash flow, and ultimately improve the value and sustainability of your business. And one of the tools to do that is actually developing some key performance indicators. And key performance indicators, known as KPIs, are the key drivers in a business. And again, if you think about it, because you've got to be succinct and really concise as well to deliver outputs, there should only be perhaps 3 to 5 drivers that are fundamental to the overall business success. However, naturally, these are likely to be augmented by a range of KPIs at a departmental or indeed a project level. Indeed, quite often you can have a major KPI and quite a few other KPIs who ultimately are all subsets of creating and contributing to the result of the major KPI. And once the KPIs have been properly identified, we need to measure them properly and apply strategies and tactics to improve them. From where they are now, this is where the baseline is so important. Where are we now as part of the process to where we want to be, where we need to be? And it's important also to appreciate that KPIs can be both financial and non-financial. So let's look at the definition of a KPI. A key performance indicator is a measurable value that demonstrates how effectively a business and an organization is in achieving its key objectives. And organizations use KPIs at multiple levels to evaluate their success at reaching targets. High-level KPIs may focus on the overall performance of the business or organization, while low-level KPIs may focus on processes in departments such as sales or marketing, HR, support, and indeed others. It's also important, and quite often you see this, particularly, for example, if you're involved in research and development, etc., the KPIs may also be specific to projects. But if you think about it, KPIs allow businesses to monitor and measure their success. And as we've said before, they don't always have to be about money. For example, measuring productivity or asset utilization. Let's say, for example, in hotel room occupancy. Customer retention is another KPI in many businesses, campaign response to campaigns, looking at where you're getting value for money for why you decide to go through. And let's be fair, any marketing campaign will normally take a considerable period of time to see the rewards coming back. So you have to allow for that. Again, you can have KPIs around complaints or effectiveness of the website or social media platforms, around customer satisfaction. These are just a few ways you can improve the performance, culture, and customer experience of your business by utilization of KPIs. But it's all about understanding the key drivers within your business and sharing these with your team. And that's really, really fundamental so that everyone understands and, most importantly, is accountable for the results. And achieving and celebrating KPI targets builds a happier and a more profitable work environment. Certainly in our own organization, even in terms of individuals, normally their KPIs would be broken up between personal and how they contribute to an overall KPI of their division or indeed the overall practice. So there's many parallels if you think, and you probably picked it up, I'm sure, already in my presentation. I often refer to the parallels between sport and business because, you know, if you're a sports fan as I am, and unfortunately you're as old as I am, you'll probably remember I'm not sure I actually remember the introduction of Match of the Day in 1964, but I can assure you that certainly during the 1960s, I definitely watched Match of the Day. And if you think about it, the coverage of Match of the Day in those days and the earlier coverage of the British Open golf on TV, they only had a few indicators to track a team or an individual's performance. For example, in terms of the football match, it could have been the score. You're leading, you weren't leading, the score every 15 minutes, or maybe possession. That was it. And certainly in terms of golf, maybe it was the front nine and the back nine scores. But today, if you think about it, you cannot watch a football match or a golf tournament on TV without being inundated with statistics about the individual players or the team tactics. And one thing is for sure, the player or the team with the best overall statistics wins the tournament or the game. And if you think about it, our business, your business, is much like that professional football team or professional golfer. That is playing hard to earn their pay. And you can be sure that they are tracking their own performance along with the media. Thus, I'm using this example to say that in today's business environment, every business and employee should have KPIs, because by encouraging accountability, you ultimately improve performance. In the long run, the business that wins the game is the one that tracks the KPIs and improves their KPIs on a regular basis. Look, if ever you want a great role model to study over life, Padraig Harrington, the golfer. It's amazing if you watch how he developed continuously his career through utilization of KPIs. He maybe didn't call them KPIs, but actually they were KPIs. Small inches he was trying to improve in different areas of his swing or different areas of the outputs of his golf game. And thankfully, many of today's IT management systems will assist in monitoring key performance indicators on a monthly or a weekly or a daily basis, whatever is appropriate. And I would suggest, if you're not using them, that utilization of dashboards can be particularly helpful. And with very little work and design, you can put in place a specific dashboard that produces the information you require to run your business based on what you're trying to achieve and what you consider to be the objectives of your business. But if you think about it, what makes a KPI effective? Well, a key performance indicator is only as valuable as the action it inspires. And to be fair, too often businesses, they blindly adopt industry or sector recognized KPIs and then wonder why the KPI doesn't reflect their own business and it fails to affect any positive change. One of the most important but often overlooked aspects of KPIs is that they are a form of communication. Succinct, clear and relevant information is much more likely to be absorbed and acted upon. It's the same in everything. The communication is so important. Thus, in terms of a strategy, of developing a strategy for formulating KPIs, we would suggest that you start with the basics and understand what your business objectives are and how you plan on achieving them and who can act on this information. Writing a clear objective for your KPI is one of the most important, if not the most important part of developing KPIs. Why do you want that KPI? Why are you designing that KPI? What will the information it produces enable you to learn about your business and improve your business? Now, if you think about it, there's no perfect process. This is really an iterative process that involves feedback from management and employees, and sometimes it could be feedback from customers or from the market, from the sector. It includes reference to available sector KPIs, which is what we talked about earlier on, but the reference to sector statistics. As this fact-finding mission unfolds, you certainly will and should gain a better understanding of which business processes need to be measured with a KPI dashboard and with whom that information should be shared, who can influence it, who is accountable to improve it. Now, I'm just going to take a glass of water if you don't mind. One way to evaluate the relevance of a performance indicator, to be honest with you, is to use what's called SMART criteria. Well, the letters of the word SMART are typically taken to stand for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So in other words, is your KPI specific? Will it help you measure progress towards the goal that you want to achieve? Is that goal relatively attainable? How relevant is the goal to your organization? How relevant is that KPI to your organization? And what is the time frame for achieving the goal of the KPI? Now, we believe really those criteria are quite important to be put beside any KPI, but we would suggest to go a little bit further and to become even smarter with your KPIs. And because we believe that that SMART criteria we referred to in the previous slide can also be expanded to be smarter with the addition of evaluate and reevaluate, using the word smarter as opposed to smart. And if you think about it, these two steps are extremely important because they ensure, that drive for continual improvement. They ensure you continually assess your KPIs and their relevance to your business. Now, if you think about it, for example, if you've exceeded your revenue target for the current month of the year, you should determine if that's because you set your goal too low or if it's attributable to some other factor. You have to get underneath the figures to understand the causes. What's driving that KPI? Now, it's fair to say that there's a very wide range of businesses operating in the Northern Ireland tourism sector in terms of size and activity and sector niche. And although there are generic overall financial KPIs that can be applied to most businesses, the niche key performance indicators relevant to business operations, say an hotel or a restaurant or a bed and breakfast or a tour operator or indeed an activity provided within the tourism sector, they may and will vary greatly. And indeed, within each sector, there'll be further specialization in order to reflect the size and the nature of the business activity or the strategy being followed by the particular business. However, There must be a way to define and measure the KPI, and also to match the specific KPI measure to the business, acknowledging the difference, as we've already highlighted, between financial and non-financial KPIs. And I thought it might be useful just to share a few examples with you to highlight these points. For example, a business focused on increasing its sales to consider how this could be perhaps measured. It may decide, is it going to measure it in terms of units sold or by value of sales? You may also need to set a target of increasing sales by, say, 10% or by sales or service type. That's individual sale or service type. Now, that's particularly helpful where you have a range of products and services, and they can be influenced because in the previous webinar I highlighted, if you could, rather than to put it bluntly, to throw all your sales into one bucket account, if you can divide your sales up into some broad categories and work out the revenue for that and the direct cost of sales for that particular category of sale, product or sales service, then you can work out what's called the gross profit for each category of sale, and therefore it may well be that you wish to improve some sales categories relevant to others because they generate additional profitability. If you think about another potential KPI, it could be where you have a high proportion of part-time staff, and to improve labour efficiency, you may wish to measure staff turnover in order to try and avoid continuous recruitment costs and training costs in order to improve the quality of your service, not having to retrain staff all the time and getting a consistency of service level. So in this regard, for example, you may choose staff turnover ratio, or you may choose measuring staff absenteeism. You may even carry out staff surveys. In our own case, for example, we do a staff pulse survey every week, Thursday morning of every week, 9 o'clock. We do a survey, we ask a question, how's it going? And staff mark it 1 to 10, and there's also an opportunity for a comment. And believe it or not, the results are coordinated by a firm in Nottingham. You have all day Thursday and up to 5 o'clock Friday to participate. It takes 10 seconds to complete the survey unless you want to add a comment. And it's undertaken anonymously. You'd be amazed the amount of insights that we gain from that. Things we didn't realize, even actually quite often some staff use it for OFIs, opportunities for improvement. Then you could be trying to measure, you could have another KPI to measure customer satisfaction. For example, having more customers you think about, and this is very important, won't necessarily be good for your business. In many instances it can be, but in some instances it may not be. For example, if your service or quality levels fall because maybe you've taken on too many customers in terms of the resources you have to service them, and a few of your customers are not satisfied with the services you're providing them, and they share those experiences of disappointment with friends or family members, or even strangers, and perhaps share them through reviews like TripAdvisor. Acknowledging, by the way, before somebody comes in the Q&A session and says TripAdvisor, we all acknowledge that it has to be put in context, and some of the times the comments are not fair and not objective, but they're there, and they're there for other people to see. Equally, it's important to appreciate, for example, that a 5-star hotel may have totally different priorities to a 3-star hotel. And common KPIs, key performance indicators or norms could differ quite significantly between those two hotels. From a revenue point of view, or revenue, say, for example, per available room, average occupancy rate, the gross operating profit per room, the marketing costs per booking. So if you're doing benchmarking there, you'd want to get further into the sector within the sector. So rather than just hotels, you'd want to get into 3-star, 3-star hotels or 5-star hotels. If you think about the number of covers, maybe an appropriate KPI for a city centre pizza restaurant, because it will need to serve its customers promptly and efficiently to meet its overheads and make an acceptable level of profit. And because the truth is the emphasis more likely could be on volume rather than average spend per customer, because the rate is quite narrow in that situation, where average spend per customer may not be as significant a variable in terms of total revenue. On the other hand, contrast that with, say, an upmarket restaurant located in the suburbs, which may decide that customer satisfaction will bring in the repeat. In order for customer satisfaction, they'll try and bring in the repeat and high spending customers, where customer experience is very important in order to refer other business to new potential customers. In this case, for example, a suitable KPI might be the level of average spend, with the objective being to increase the average spend per customer per table, because there may only be one cover per evening as opposed to 3 or 4 in the pizza restaurant. Similarly, if we go and look at a tour operating business, a KPI for, or indeed an activity provider, it could be in their case, the effectiveness, just at present difficult times for them, but it could be the effectiveness of vouchers or discount offers, or indeed their cost of sales. And again, if you're looking at the cost of sales of a tour operator, it would vary quite significantly from, say, an hotel or a restaurant. And the same, it would be more similar perhaps to activity-based tourism products. But you would look at, in terms of cost of sales, you would certainly include direct labour costs, but you would also include, in the case of a tour operator, insurances and equipment costs. For example, maintenance, etc., is a cost of the sale. It's a cost of using the bus. So, as I said before, no two businesses are the same. It's very difficult, to be honest with you, to design in a public open webinar series the appropriate KPIs for a particular business. However, what we thought would be useful would be to share with you, first of all, frequently used generic KPIs, financial KPIs, and then to go into some KPIs that are specific to core sectors of the Northern Ireland tourism industry. So in terms of financial KPIs, it's fair to say there are probably 6 broad headings at a generic level: turnover, profitability, productivity, gearing and insolvency, liquidity and working capital. And briefly, we'll share these with you just to give you a feel of what they're about, because you hear people talking about them regularly, and just to explain them. For example, in terms of sales, first of all, your sales are your product mix. And this basically is, how is your sales broken up? For example, if you're an hotel of any type, or I was going to say a B&B, but you couldn't say a B&B would be doing too many weddings. So you have, first of all, you break, maybe you may wish to break your sales down into accommodation, food, weddings, tour groups, or others. But it doesn't matter if you're a tour operator, then you break it down between recurring tour bookings to perhaps one-off events, etc., etc. It doesn't really matter, but it's back to this area of categorizing your sales product or sales service into 3, 4, in this case, 5 different categories. Then you may wish to look at the geographical mix of your sales. This is where your sales are generated from, where your customers come from. And again, obviously from a Northern Ireland tourist sector point of view, the normal sectors, whether it be ROI or Northern Ireland itself, whether it be GB or France or Germany or US or Australia. But obviously we're very conscious that at present there are no out-of-state visitors, and the staycations is really the only opportunity we have in the short term when our business is open again to generate sales revenue. Now, other frequently used KPIs for turnover, for example, could be the proportion of sales revenue generated by repeat customers over a particular time frame. And if you think about what that does, is this KPI measures the success in attracting and retaining customers and of its general level of service. I'll go outside the Northern Ireland hotel sector for a second. There's an hotel in Rosslare, which many of you, I suspect, will know, called Kelly's in Rosslare. And it's claimed that Kelly's in any one week have approximately over 75% of the people staying have stayed in the same week the previous year. But how you calculate this ratio is very simple. You put the sales generated by your repeat customers over total sales, and that lets you know what proportion of your total sales, percentage-wise, is from repeat customers. You can do the exact same concept to find out what proportion of your sales is from new customers. And it's also quite attractive, because that's maybe looking at how effective you've been in terms of your marketing strategy in gaining new customers for the first time. And again, what you do there is you look at sales generated by new customers over total sales, multiply it by 100 to give you the percentage. So if we look at frequently used KPIs for profitability, and again, to be fair, I could have given you 5, 6, 7 here, but I've just picked out 3 because they tell a core message. Probably the one we focused on last week when we were doing pricing and costing was the gross profit margin ratio, which is fundamental to understanding your business. And this ratio, to be honest with you, it measures management's overall ability to realize profits by generating sales and controlling the expenses for which it has direct responsibility. That is revenue less direct costs, which if you think about it can normally would have to be direct labour, direct materials or variable overheads. That's expenses specifically related to the sales activity. There's definitely key industry benchmarks available for gross profit, which as I said is sales less the cost of sales, and the gross profit margin can be used to determine what activities are most profitable and how profitable your business is in terms of its core operating activities relative to competitors. Gross profit ratio, which for those of you who joined us for the pricing and costing seminars will be very conscious to know it's gross operating profit over total revenue multiplied by 100%. Then you have the EBITDA ratio, which is the earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. And it's a measure of the company's overall financial performance. And it's used as basically an alternative to simple earnings or net profits. EBITDA removes the impact of capital investments like property or plant and equipment, and it also removes the impact of how the business is financed. EBITDA can therefore be used as a proxy, to be honest with you, to measure the free cash flow of the business. And again, all you do here is you calculate the EBITDA, which is normally available from the annual profit and loss account, and you express it as a percentage of revenue. And it's particularly important because what this does is it eliminates whether, for example, your business is being funded by a bank or being funded by you personally. It takes that all out of the equation in terms of looking at the profitability of the business before it looks at finance costs, or indeed, for example, in terms of depreciation of machinery. It takes it out, and it's a very good core measure of profitability. And then you have the net profit ratio, which in simple terms is the profit after you take off tax. So it's a profit after tax, and basically it's after all your fixed costs as well. So it's profit after tax divided by total revenue multiplied by 100 gives you your net profit percentage. And again, it's very easy normally to estimate how you're doing against other firms or other businesses in the same sector, because that normally these type of ratios are quite common for the sector. And all this information, to be honest with you, can be sourced from your profit and loss account. There's no shortage of productivity ratios, to be honest with you, and they're looking at how effective a particular it could be how effective labour is, it could be how effective in terms of turnover per employee, or it could be value added. And really, for example, I've just left a few, I'm not going to go through each of these ratios, but for example, direct wages as a percentage of turnover, you simply take your direct wages and you divide it by total sales. You can do the same for turnover per total employee. Again, there's an important concept called value added, which means if you take out all the third-party inputs into your business, what then does your business add? And again, you can work out value added per direct employee. The calculations there, you take gross profit and you add back depreciation, indirect wages and direct wages, because you think about you're paying those labour costs. So you're paying for that cost. You take all them out. You add all them on to gross profit, and then, sorry, you don't take them out, you add them on, and then you divide them by your average number of direct employees. Again, you can do that for direct or for total employees if you wish as well. As the second one is total, the one above it is direct employee. And again, you can work out your average salary per either direct employee or total employee. And these are quite often interesting to compare like with like in terms of taking decisions for your business. Now, frequently used financial gearing and insolvency ratios, they basically measure the ability of the business to meet its debt liabilities as they fall due. And gearing, which is sometimes referred to as the gearing percentage or the leverage percentage, it measures the proportion of assets invested in the business that are financed by long-term borrowing. It also looks at short-term borrowing as well. To be fair, the higher the level of gearing, the higher are the risks to the business. Since if you think about it, interest has to be paid and debts have to be repaid irrespective of whether you make a profit or not. So gearing is something that's regularly looked at by a lender who's thinking of lending you money or somebody providing you with asset finance, etc. One of the ratios they will look at is the gearing and the leverage ratio, which is bank overdraft and finance creditors, which would be HP and leasing, plus term loans over capital employed. You then have a ratio called the debt service, the debt cover ratio. You may hear people talking about this. And what this basically really means, this ratio measures is the cash flow available to pay your current debt obligations as they fall due. So basically what it does is it takes your net operating income, your EBITDA, which you got to remember is your cash profits we talked about earlier after adjusting for tax, depreciation and amortization, and it expresses that as a multiple over your interest and capital repayments on your debt. And it tells you many times that your cash profits cover your annual, in case of a year, your annual interest and capital debt repayments or principal debt repayments. And then you have basically the interest cover, which works purely at interest as opposed to interest and debt capital. And basically it expresses the number of times interest charges can be covered from profits. And again, the greater the number of times interest can be earned, thus the greater this ratio, the better, because if you have a higher ratio, then there's less risk of the business not being able to pay interest on a loan, etc. And again, that information for these ratios will become the source of both your profit and loss account and your balance sheet. Now, there's also a number of common ratios for what's called liquidity, and they determine a business ability to pay its current liabilities, which goes beyond debt. It includes also trade creditors, for example, as they fall due without actually having to raise external finance. And the most common liquidity or current ratios is sometimes referred to is simply where you divide you put your total assets over your total liabilities. And you think about it, it reveals the amount of current assets for every pound of current liabilities. Again, very simple ratio. You would want this to be 150 to 200%. You'd want your current assets ideally exceeding your current liabilities. And this is why, if you remember in the pricing and costing webinar, I highlighted the importance of making sure if you have a loan, make sure you only disclose what's due within 1 year as a current liability, and the balance is due after 1 year you disclose as a long-term liability, because otherwise you'll come up with a very poor current ratio, which would send all the wrong signals out to somebody looking at your business. The asset test ratio, sometimes referred to also as the liquidity ratio, it measures a business that could be considering what's called its quick assets. It looks at current assets minus stock and work in progress, because it believes that stock and work in progress are the least cash liquid of assets. It takes a time to convert quite often. You just can't convert, in many cases, stock or work in progress into cash immediately. So it reflects the ability of the business to pay its debts by comparing cash or near cash assets with short-term liabilities. And again, you source this information from the balance sheet, and there are guidelines. What this ratio you would definitely want to be 1 or 100. You'd want the current assets minus stock and work in progress to exceed your current liabilities, but it wouldn't have to be as high as obviously the current ratio, which includes stock. Then you have working capital, which again is the funding or the capital you require to fund the ongoing activities of your business, to fund the growth of turnover. And it reveals there are 3 ratios I've used here. One you probably hear people referring to regularly, which is the debtor days or the average collection period. And what this ratio simply reveals is the average number of days taken by the business to collect its trade debtors. That is, debts due from credit sales. And it's you put it a different way, you could say it's the average number of days allowed to debtors by you, the business, to pay you. The lower this ratio, the better, because it means your business being paid more promptly. Again, it's trade debtors, including VAT. over sales including VAT. On the contrast, the opposite, you also have then the average payment period, or the creditor's days ratio, which is the ratio which reveals the average number of days taken by your business to pay your trade creditors or your trade suppliers. Or alternatively, you could say it's the average number of days which your trade creditors or suppliers allow you before you have to pay them. And the higher this ratio, the better, because actually in this case it means you're being given longer time, longer credit period to pay. And again, it's trade creditors over materials, and you can see we're assuming 365 days here in the year, but it was for a month, applied by 30. And stock turnover, again, this ratio measures, if you think about the number of times stock actually turns over in a year and needs to be replaced during a period, normally a year, but it could be a different period. And generally, the greater number of time that stock is turned over, the better. Because if you think about it, stock's expensive to maintain, expensive to store, and also there can be the increased risk of wastage the longer you hold stock. So in respect to hotels or restaurants, it's fair to say in bars, stock turnovers quite often would usually be calculated separately for both food and beverages. And again, if it was food, it would be food raw materials. If it was beverage, it would be beverage raw materials over stock minus stock move, which is your opening stock minus your closing stock, which gives you the stock you've used during the period or you still have. And a very important ratio in terms of, you'll see a lot of places now are doing stock takes weekly or monthly. Now, again, I'm very conscious that there's a whole lot of different businesses in the tourism sector, and that hotels, certainly, and restaurants are part of the sector, but there are many other businesses as well. But just to highlight, I thought we quickly focus in on primary KPIs and use in the hotel industry. It's fair to say, in terms of food and beverage, it'd also be in use in the restaurant business as well, where accommodation would be hotels, and accommodation obviously could then be also applied to the bed and breakfast, as could more regularly the food ratio. So quite often the ratio you'd use for accommodation would be the average room rate, the bedroom occupancy rate, the revenue per available room, the cost per occupied room, and the labour cost ratio. And we'll look at each of those, and we'll look briefly at the various food and beverage ratios that are very common in the hotel industry. In terms of the average room rate, basically it's calculated that the average, it reveals it's the average rate charged per room that's actually occupied, and it's calculated by dividing the room's revenue by the number of paid rooms occupied. Very simple. As you can see yourself, rooms revenue, net of VAT, important, net of VAT over number of rooms sold. And then you can go to the next stage, which is basically the occupancy rate, and basically it compares the number of rooms actually sold to the number of rooms available. And certainly this determines whether the premises are being used efficiently, and it quite often will be very important in terms of marketing and sales strategies and special offers. And it's calculated by, if you think of it, it's very simple. You divide the number of rooms sold by the number of rooms available. And again, the good thing about these type of ratios are they're so common, and there's industry statistics available for them for different categories of hotels, etc., operating in the sector. Then you basically, another one would be the revenue per room ratio, which compares room revenue to the number of rooms available, which you work out then your average revenue per room over a period of time. And equally, you then can do your cost per occupied room, which basically it compares the cost. It's the opposite to the revenue. It compares the cost of the rooms department, the accommodation department, to the number of rooms sold. And managers often rely on this ratio to determine whether or not room costs are reasonable. And again, how do you get it? You take the occupied rate is calculated by dividing the cost of the rooms, which you work out from your rooms department, by the number of rooms actually sold in a period. Now, in terms of food and beverage, this basically the food cost of sales ratio. This compares the cost of food sales to food revenue, and again, it's quite important, in particular if you're at the coal face and running the kitchen or a restaurant. And again, it's the cost of food sales over food revenue, again, be important. Net of VAT's important, and multiply by 100 to get your food cost of sales ratio. And obviously that would allow you to work out your gross profit on food as well once you knew that. And equally, your beverage cost to sales ratio, it compares the cost of beverage sales to beverage revenue. And again, it's determining whether your beverage costs are reasonable. Again, you know, depending on different types of entities, different types of hotels or bars or restaurant cum bars, this margin can vary. It can also vary on your sales mix of beverages as well. Again, you can also look at your average spend and your beverage average spend. Same concept really as the rooms, except we're now using food and beverages. So you put your food revenue over your average, over your number of covers to give you your average food spend per cover. And the exact same concept with beverages, where you calculate by dividing the total beverage revenue, total beverage sales, by the number of covers. And covers normally refers to, if you think about it, to the guests served in the beverage operation during a period. Now, look, the one thing I'm trying to avoid is going on and listing various KPIs, because it can be quite boring. So suffice to say, virtually every activity within a business, there are KPIs. For example, you can see I've just listed here some examples of marketing KPIs, which can go to the amount of new leads, to the cost per lead generated, to the conversion, to the cost per conversion, to again, you can go to a more sophisticated KPI, which is a little bit more difficult to measure, which would be the customer acquisition cost. And similarly, if you think about the website, again, there's tons of KPIs you can look at to measure the effectiveness of your website, whether it be sessions or paid views or new user percentage or conversion from a call to action content, very important if you're using specific marketing campaigns. But etc., you will know, your people in the business, the most important thing here is that there's no good just opening a website. You have to decide what do you hope to achieve from the website and put down targets, and then review to see how it's actually performed. And that gives you an indication of what's working and what's not working. The same with social media. I don't want to bore you, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Again, you can set a number of KPIs, and these could be directly related to certain things in terms of conversion of business and business revenues. Now, I referred earlier to benchmarking, and this is a very important concept. And I think it's important we just pause for a second to reflect and understand what benchmarking is. I mean, basically comparing key performance indicators on an internal basis, we think about it, only suggests that your business is performing better or less than was expected. But it takes no account of how your business has performed against best in class or indeed the wider industry. So therefore, measuring your performance against external benchmarking enables you to establish whether there's an increase or a reduction is better than or worse than the general trend in the industry. And that really is important if you think about it, because you always want to compare yourself with the industry and with the best in class, because by doing that, it's far more meaningful to help you take and to focus on areas where you think early wins, early corrective actions can add to your business. And certainly it also helps third parties understand how your business is performing. And certainly if you're going to seek financial help from banks or grants from government or equity from other parties, you can take it for granted they will be applying benchmarking to the performance of your business to assess it. So benchmarking against the industry norms will normally allow you to identify the trends, the areas you are over or underperforming in, and prompt you to investigate the cause. That brings us back in. The cause is the key. It's not the problem isn't the issue. It's how, once you identify what the causes are, how you can make decisions to improve that KPI, to improve profitability. That's what is measuring value and sustainability of your business. Or it could be to improve activity if the KPI is measuring productivity. So just a few concluding comments on KPI as we come towards the end of the seminar. It's fair to say that key performance indicators generally are an essential tool for measuring the success of your business or making the adjustments required to make it even more successful. But it is equally important to appreciate that the usefulness of individual key performance indicators, though, have their limits. And the most important part of any KPI is its utility. And you know, once it has outlived its usefulness, you shouldn't hesitate to cease using it. Don't do it just for the sake of it. You're wasting time. It's far more important you cease using the KPI and you get started on designing a new KPI that better aligns with your evolving and underlying business objectives. It's also important to appreciate that the quality of management information and your accounting records is key in determining ultimately the effectiveness of your KPIs. Garbage in, garbage out. So the quality of the information is very, very important. I thought just before we conclude that, you know, we would try and put things into balance. And certainly I believe personally work-life balance is very important. Certainly in my own case, I've never turned off the clock at 5 o'clock or the watch at 5 o'clock. And certainly in the tourism industry, in most cases, you can't do that. But I think it can be seamless. You can interwove both. But just to focus the mind for a second, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, "You make a living out of what you make a living of what you get, but you make a life out of what you give." Worth thinking about that. I think St. Francis said it in a different way, and he said was in giving we receive, or that the door to happiness, I think he also said, opens outwards. I think it is important, but again, on an event like a webinar or a learning event like today, that we think about this. It's important that we never get too busy making a living that we forget to make a life. So in conclusion, I hope we've got across the message today that agile business planning is pivotal to business success, and that the future belongs to those who plan for it, especially in the context of responding to and living post-COVID-19. If we leave you something today, it's the key message that without a destination, you'll never get there. So we must decide what our destination is. Don't just keep our head stuck in the sand. Stand back and decide, what are we trying to achieve? Effective key performance indicators complemented by benchmarking are certainly a key tool to help you better understand your business, measure and monitor performance, and recognize areas for corrective action. I hope we've convinced you that smarter KPIs coupled with astute business planning processes will enhance the prospects of a business to increase its profits, to create a better cash flow, and ultimately to improve the value and sustainability of the business going forward. I would certainly want to highlight again, if I haven't highlighted sufficiently during the course of the webinar, that do not restrict yourself or your business to the most commonly used key performance indicators, as they may not be entirely relevant to your circumstances. Whatever you measure, it has to be relevant. So decide what you want to measure to be relevant to your business and then measure it. But don't put it on the shelf. Not only measure it, monitor it, carry out variance analysis, and then take corrective action. You know, ideally, it's perhaps best in terms of KPIs to use figures from real case studies and financial statements and management information to illustrate the effectiveness of KPIs and benchmarking. And certainly, if I was going out to an individual business, that's the way I would do it. However, given the time constraints and the breadth and variety of business operations currently operating in the non-Ireland tourism sector, it was decided to concentrate on identifying the most commonly used KPIs in the tourism sector and focusing on the formula and the rationale behind these various KPIs. Obviously, a workshop would be a better forum to illustrate real case study figures. But again, one of the mistakes people make quite often with KPIs is they jump in to do the calculation without first of all understanding the rationale behind the KPI and where it fits in and is relevant to the overall objectives and understanding of the business. So actually, by focusing today on the formula, that's the first phase, and ultimately then enhances the implementation of KPIs when you actually apply figures. I should say that if today's webinar has raised an issue or a question that you'd like to discuss in private, you can get in touch via email to industry.development@tourismni.com, as you can see there on the screen. And Tourism Northern Ireland will organise that you get a call from a finance expert. Certainly, I'm looking forward to participating now in the question and answer session. And all that remains for me to say before we go into the Q&A is to thank you very much for joining us today and to wish you continued success and indeed enjoyment in the challenges and the fun of running businesses, albeit at times it may not seem like fun, but if you stand back, it is fun. You're adding value, you're helping society, and you're helping community. And certainly, I think from a Northern Ireland perspective, we can never underestimate the contribution that the tourism sector has made and will make to the future of Northern Ireland going forward. We thank you for joining us today.